Ships or Shipsy? Only you can decide. Find out more at shipz.com. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, supply chainers. Happy Tuesday. Super excited to be here with you for Thoughts and Coffee. AJ, my man in the background, was dancing to our video. That's why I was kind of laughing as I came in to greet you this morning. I hope everybody had a really great Monday and you're looking forward to this Tuesday and onwards to the week. So for those who don't know, my name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, and I am the host and founder of Let's Talk Supply Chain, as well as the CEO of Ships. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a recap of what's happening with the show today or this week. So this week's episode is Woman in Supply Chain. Yes, our amazing series that we are featuring women in supply chain every single month on a podcast and a blog. And this week's episode is with Michelle Livingstone from the Home Depot. And I have been on a diversity group with her for the Journal of Commerce, and she's amazing. She's doing some incredible things in the industry about diversity. So if you haven't checked it out, go and check out episode 144 wherever you subscribe to Let's Talk Supply Chain, or under podcasts or Women in Supply Chain page over at letstalksupplychain.com. Plus, this week we are releasing a brand new mini series in partnership with IANA. And we are going to be talking about, what does intermodal mean to you? And intermodal, if you don't know, actually touches everybody's lives. And you probably don't believe me, so you're going to want to tune into this mini series, because we go over why. What does intermodal look like in your daily life, and what does it actually mean to you? So stay tuned, because that one comes out Thursday afternoon. And then, of course, over on the SC Supply Chain TV, we've got some brand new Supply Chain Minute coming out Thursday morning. We've got some new episodes from the Data Den with Susan Walsh, as well as Andrew Johnson from the front line. So go and check that out. That's the SC Supply Chain TV over on YouTube. What else do we have this week? We have the question of the week, and I'm going to bring up Audrey for that. Good morning, Audrey. How you doing?
Good morning. Good.
Yeah?
Very excited for a new Tuesday and a new week. Yeah.
Are you really? I'm just kidding. It's getting a little bit colder here. I just want to let everybody know.
I was having a little rough morning with,
So I've got my Tim Hortons coffee here. I mean, if anybody knows, Tim Hortons is our, it's not really our Starbucks, but it's like our
Dunkin'? No, it's our Dunkin'. It's like the Eastern Seaboard's Dunkin', and like the West Coast, I don't know, In-N-Out Burger.
Anyways, this is our coffee, and so I've decided to show some love to Tim Hortons this morning. It's really good coffee, by the way. Anyways, so the question of the week this week that we're going to be asking tomorrow morning on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, maybe even TikTok if you're following us over on TikTok. And if you're not, you're going to want to follow us. We've got some really fun stuff happening over there. So the question is, what are some of the resources that have helped you in your supply chain career? Audrey.
You're one of the resources.
Well, thank you.
I'll be like, Sarah. For me, it'd be a lot of people. There's a lot of people who you meet and interact with, and I would say they've, that's been a big part of my learning and, meeting, and then, opportunities and different, things that are going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say,
Fit.
Some of the articles from The Hustle, because we've been featuring those, and I think we've got 2 coming up today.
Yeah.
I love that they're talking about supply chain. I would even say FIT, the Forum for International Trade Training. You and I are both CITPs. I just did a panel on that yesterday. and with a bunch of CITPs. And that's been a really good resource for me as far as international trade. When I was working for a 3PL, and I had come out of operations and gone into sales, I needed to understand a little bit more from the customer's perspective. And so FIT really helped me with that because I was able to understand a little bit more about international trade. Davin, good morning. We see that you've got your coffee. Thanks for joining us today. So anyways, let's move on. We are going to move on to my thoughts and coffee post. Did you see this post?
Yes.
And what did you think? So I think people were a tiny bit confused as to what I was asking, because we've got Blended coming up. And it says in this post that we're going to release the first episode of Blended, which is our new diversity and inclusion show, on October 20th. But we're actually moving it up. We just recorded it yesterday, and we're going to move it up to October 14th. So stay tuned for that. It's really good. The title of the episode is What's in a Word? And so we're talking about the words around diversity and inclusion with people from all walks of life in supply chain that are coming together to really move the needle forward on diversity and inclusion. And so in the lead up to that, I wanted to do a post about bias, because we all have bias, conscious, unconscious, what have you. It's there. And one of the exercises I was going through, who viewed your profile? I think it was last week. And, I was looking to see who I was already connected with, who looked at my profile but didn't connect. And it was interesting to me to see from face value, just looking at that, why I was hovering and why I would connect with them or wouldn't connect with them. And it made me think about what my biases are and how to be aware of them. And I thought it was a really cool exercise. Some of the people thought that they needed to connect with everybody in there. And I was like, no. You don't have to connect with anybody. It's just an exercise of becoming aware as to why you would or why you wouldn't. And that really determines some of what your biases are.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
No, it's so true. And I think, we're kind of trained from, we don't realize maybe how much we're trained from a North American lens, or from, in Canada, we're sort of a former British colony. So like how much of that has influenced our history or our day-to-day culture. And so, things like not having a photo are like massive here. You're like, how could you not have a photo on your LinkedIn? How will I know who you are? Or certain designations that were like, I don't recognize that. I don't know who this is. And so it does, for me, it does give you kind of it makes me pause and be like, why am I not being open to having this person who's clearly reached out for maybe a reason, or maybe just to connect, I don't build their numbers. I don't know. I can help out. So but I mean, you can have boundaries and not just have everybody on your LinkedIn. It is a professional website. So if it doesn't make sense, or if they haven't done a message, sometimes what I've done before is if I'm kind of curious, I'll just send them a message and be like, hey, like what are you hoping to connect on? Or, I can't really see a correlation. So,
I like the ones where somebody comes back and says, what intrigued you about my profile? To want to connect if there's no note and stuff like that. But I think it's also interesting is if you look at the profile and you're sort of deciding whether to connect with them or not. And what are those biases? Is it the title? Is it their picture? Is it, what is it about it that you do or you do not want to connect? Whether you connect or not, it's just about being aware of what those biases are. Colin Russell says there are efforts from some U.S. states that a certain percentage of suppliers for large companies have to be minority owned or meet certain diversity requirements, specifically California. Yes, that is awesome. And something that we're also going to be talking about on Blended, our new diversity and inclusion show. And then Davin, good morning, Chris. Davin says nothing worse than connection requests from people that have never even looked at your profile.
I mean, I like me, but why do you like me? Like what?
I know. I know why you want to connect with me. No. Yeah. So, anyways, it was just an exercise in, taking a look at bias and what that actually means. But we have a lot to get to. We've got 4 articles to get to
You got 4 articles.
today. So we may as well get started. Good morning, John.
It's
Look, we can actually
John,
see
and we
his
can
name
see
this
him.
time. It doesn't say LinkedIn user,
Speaking of bias.
which is awesome. Awesome, awesome. All right. So our first article is about how India's agri-food supply chains fared during COVID-19
Yeah,
lockdown from
yeah.
farm to fork. I thought this was an interesting article because obviously we don't want to just focus on North America. We all know that we've had some challenges with our food supply chain in North America, and so I wanted to just bring it to the community and sort of see what was happening worldwide. And I thought India was a good example through this article. So, what
Mhm.
did you think when you were reading this?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a good perspective on the different ways. There are some similarities in how we access our food, but I do think the sort of farmers market and roadside market is maybe a bit more of a common model in India than maybe it is here in, like, I'm in big city Toronto, and we have farmers markets and people love them, but I think it really is a staple to the grocery supply chain in India. And what I thought was interesting too was when they ran into as we've done here, I'm sure if anyone's ever worked in and around their family business, it's like they just instead of having a labor shortage, they would just sort of bring in family members to cover the shifts, which, I mean, will keep something going, but maybe isn't shaking out as far as wages and getting paid goes.
Yeah,
But that's an interesting way they were able to pivot and sort of be innovative in what seemed like, especially in May for India, because they had a very large lockdown. It seemed like a massive crisis. So it was just sort of an easy way for them to pivot around that. But it's definitely fascinating now that they're, in the article, it leads into like, okay, now that they've seen what's happened, what can they do moving forward, and how can each player get involved in a more effective way? Like, now
yeah,
everyone is like, okay, we saw what happened in a crisis and everybody was sort of able to pivot. And then now it's the going back and saying like, okay, well, what can we set up so that this remains efficient, and so that, we don't have these sort of gaps on wages or gaps on labor shortage or gaps on product. Are there steps that we can take? So, a very interesting article from that grocery supply chain perspective, and definitely in another country as well.
yeah. I would absolutely agree with you. I sort of looked at it like, what can we take from this article and learn from?
Yeah.
Some of the things that I thought was really interesting was that they were talking about how their food supply chain ended up being resilient. And a couple of reasons for that. You mentioned family labor, because the two that came out on top were mom and pop corner stores and street retailers. And those were the two that actually kept the food supply chain resilient. And part of the reason for that was because they had their families involved,
Yeah.
and their families could do some of the work, and they could expand because they had their families involved. I
Yeah.
think the other thing too was that they used WhatsApp and social to change their
Oh, okay.
model for
Yeah.
deliveries,
Yeah.
which I thought was really, really cool because, it's not something that we hear about all the time, but they adapted really quickly and they used WhatsApp to
Yeah.
let people know the produce that they had, the food that they had, and whether or not they wanted it to be delivered. But they also went a little bit further and used social media to do that so that they could deliver the food that they had on hand. So nobody really, went without, or there
Or
was
was
too much of a
wasted.
shortage.
Yeah.
So they were able to expand that
Yeah.
business through deliveries, which I thought was really, really cool.
Yeah, here I think there's been a bit of a struggle in sorting out how, like, especially from some of the small businesses, and I'm sure for some of them, social can be a pain. But if you're not updating what you have, then consumers are like, well, I'm just going to go somewhere. I know Costco will have this. I
Yeah.
know this big grocery store might have this, and like, I'd
Yeah.
rather shop at a local, but if I'm not clear on what they have or what's going on, like a daily social post, if you're running a retail or grocery, like, it's just so helpful to your consumers, and you probably don't realize how many you're missing because they don't have that information, or like they tried to find something and just couldn't, right? I think
Yeah.
that's people's biggest pain point is, I tried to find this, I tried to go to you, you didn't have it. It doesn't have to be elaborate, like a picture or like a list. It doesn't have to be, in this kind of situation, it doesn't have to be sophisticated PR social media here. It just needs to be what you have or what's going on, and quickly and consistently.
Yeah. So people know where to go. I mean, that's
Yeah.
half the battle, right?
Yeah.
So Zahid says Indian agri-food supply chain. It's very interesting topic. Yes, we have the article in the comments. So if you want to read more about that, make sure to go and check that out. So the next one is kind of funny. I love this one. I don't know. You guys hear me talking about the hustle, and every time it comes in, I think it comes in, I get the newsletter like 2 or 3 times a week, and I scroll it for articles about supply chain and just different things that we can talk about. And so this one obviously caught my eye for different reasons.
So many reasons.
Especially the title, which I thought was really, really funny.
That's
So what
clickbait,
did you think about this one? I mean, it's a short article, but what it talks about is a 67-page report that is coming out, or has come out, and there's links in the article to that 67-page report about the electric semi truck by the Nikola company. And it's talking about it being intricate fraud built on dozens of lies. I mean, you don't want an article like this coming out about your company, but it talks about.
I mean, is any press bad press?
I know, but it comes out with the 3 strikes and you're out concept, right? Yeah. So strike 1 is that they're super dependent on GM. Strike 2 is that it's not quite fully functional yet, but have they said that they are fully functional? I don't know. Strike 3 is the SEC and DOJ are on the company's tail. I mean, that's going to be interesting. So the explanation for that is both government agencies are now said to be investigating Nikola for having misled investors about its tech. And the verdict of that, getting accused of fraud online, your friends singing, "Ooh, you're in trouble."
Yeah.
This is why I love the hustle.
Well, I mean, you'd want a second cup of coffee for a 67-page report. So this, the author breaks it down nicely. But I think, I mean, here's John popping in, right? With they can receive a valuation without running a model. I think that's the kind of, from an outside view in, I think that's sometimes what you see with tech companies and what VC is. Like, I think for your average bear looking at that kind of industry, it's like, is it a surprise that they've invested in something they haven't seen? Like, there seems to be a lot of hype, so I don't know. What's the outcome going to be? Are they going to actually have these trucks on the road? Because I mean, I think the supply chain is highly anticipating that this is going to be kind of our next step in the next 5 years. So what are the companies that are going to be involved? And it would be unfortunate if they actually really had nothing going on and it was just a bunch of hype, and because that kind of stuff delays, that kind of messing around delays progress. Right?
Yeah. And Tim says all new technology goes through a growing period. I am for anything that reduces carbon emissions. So Tim, stick around because our next article is about that actually. So I think you're gonna like that. But I think if we can get these up and running, and I think if we can get them into the supply chain, I mean, obviously, I think it's going to make a difference, and that's. And I think it's articles like these that obviously need to keep the companies legit and on task and making sure they're actually doing what they say that they do. But at the same time, I think it's kind of inevitable. It's something that we need.
It's going to happen whether they're working on it or not. And I mean, sometimes you see sometimes maybe when you're a business, you have to run sort of a social media or press of distraction, right? Because maybe you're not meeting the targets that you'd expected, or you're trying to keep shareholders updated. But for us looking in, sometimes it's like, oh, it's just like, seems like another tech VC kind of, inflated, products where there's
Valuation.
actually like there's no effort on actually like have you hired 16 engineers? Like, oh no, but you have a 50-person social media team. Like, when are we going to get the trucks, right?
Yeah. And so for anybody who wants access to that 67-page report, the article is in the comments. So now we are moving on to green supply chain management. And so this is a very, very long article. Like, not gonna lie, this is a very long article. So we're gonna
I
put the
got this
article.
one and I was like, whoa, I needed a copy to read that. And it was kind of late yesterday when I was kind of going over it again. And I was like, okay, I feel like
But there's a lot of really good information
really good
in
stuff.
here. And one of the interesting things is they actually focus on Thai rubber, like rubber that's made in Thailand. And they talk about the emissions, but I'm just going to scroll down because there's an actual part of this. See, I told you it's really, really long. See, they talk about
It's
the
a really
Thai
nice
rubber supply
in-depth,
chain.
yeah, it's a really nice in-depth market analysis of specifically the Thai rubber supply chain. But there are things that you can take out of that and apply to either your business or your market supply chain.
Yeah, and one of the parts that I am going to get to, I promise, in just a moment, because I'm still scrolling,
But if you're
is
into Thai rubber, like this is the article for you.
well, no, I just think in general, right? Because they were talking about how many products. I think there's 50,000 manufactured products today
Yeah.
that have rubber in them. And obviously making that a priority, making the green supply chain a priority in rubber is going to be huge. But the section that I really honed in on here was the transportation restructure scenario analysis.
Okay,
And
that's
what
where
they're actually talking about in this part is how rail freight is actually going to lower the emissions in our supply chain. And that's a really interesting concept because we're all talking about nearshoring and offshoring and all that kind of stuff. So shoring, yeah. I mean, and if we're looking at, diversifying our supplier base and we're looking at taking our manufacturing to different places, it might be worthwhile to take a look at the rail infrastructure and how you can better utilize it to lower your emissions as a part of your supply chain. And so that's what I kind of took out of this article, even though it's very, very long. It's a really good read, but this is the part that I kind of honed in on.
Yeah, definitely. And I was really curious to see, one for a business kind of looking at this. This is sort of a study on a segment of the market. But one, as a business, what are things that you kind of take for granted where you're like, oh, we've always moved it this way, or we haven't actually sat down and done any analysis on what our carbon emissions might be, and that is something that customers are asking about. It is maybe the time where it's like, do up another side project, but definitely start to investigate that. And then the second thing for me that I was curious about is in Canada, we move almost everything by rail from either from the East Coast through Vancouver, Prince Rupert, or through Halifax, Montreal, coming from the East Coast, coming from the West Coast, Vancouver, Prince Rupert. And what would our emissions be like if we didn't do that? I mean, we've had that rail in place since 1888, 1885 was like the first thing we did, was get rail. So it's like, it'd be interesting to see if Canada didn't have that railway, what our emissions would be, because it'd be crazy. So it's something you take for granted here too, because you're like, oh yeah, of course you just put it on the train, so.
Yeah. And if you're taking a look at what that, green concept means for your supply chains, a lot of different things to consider. And rail wasn't really something that we've heard a lot about or we've really discussed a lot about. So that's why I wanted to just sort of hone in on that article.
And I think there's a big investment in it, but I mean, it can lead to, if you look at some of the new technologies coming in, like, maybe fantastical, but Hyperloop, something that has been worked on, right? Sort of the future of
rail,
transport, maybe, but you can lay it on top of, it can be infrastructurally built on top of existing rail, right? So if a country already has rail there, and then you can build something on top of it, right? You're just using your space wisely.
Well, and it actually also goes into our mini series that starts on Thursday about intermodal, because we're talking about what it actually means to you. And so this article is a really good stage to set that up, because we're talking about rail and intermodal holistically and what that actually means. And obviously it can help with your supply chain management and if you're looking to go green. So the last and final article, actually, I think we've got some comments here. Breaking away from rubber and other petroleum products is key. Manufacturing emissions and the disintegration of petroleum products in our landfill is the double whammy. Absolutely. And Tim, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight this article, because they're talking about rubber and how to lower the emissions in that particular product space. And then we've got Zahid. Every transport industry move in electricity with alternative of oil and gas is also useful. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've got to look at obviously different parts of the strategy and how we can put them into our supply chain strategies and figure out what works holistically for our company and our supply chains, because not everything's going to work for everybody. And so I think only time will tell, but we've got to be armed with the information. So last but not least, I thought this article was pretty cool. So again, going back to the hustle, they're talking about prep centers. Have you ever heard of prep centers? Because this is the first time I've ever heard of prep centers.
Yeah, it's kind of, it makes sense. As soon as you read it, you're like, well, of course they would have something like that. But I mean, yeah, I think the Amazon e-commerce business is sort of a side of the business, because I work in a lot of business to business that I don't see it. But it makes sense that you would have to kind of gather up all of this stuff and have someone repackage it, or but the cool thing was, like, they have all those marketplace sellers on Amazon. So it's you as an individual person. And so you're buying something and selling it, and like you can send your stuff to these prep centers and they take off the tag, or they pack it up, or they fold it up, or do, and you don't even have to do that. So it's like,
well, and I thought it was kind of cool because and Montana is the birthplace of these prep centers. So what they're talking about is how your product might be coming out of Montana, but it's not actually coming from an Amazon facility, because Amazon doesn't have any facilities in Montana. But what they do have is these prep centers. And they're talking about how Crystal Graham started the town's first prep center in 2015 on a whim. And so what you do is well, actually what she's saying is that pretty soon a bunch of other residents started jumping on the prep center bandwagon. And now Roundup sees 3,000 to 4,000 packages a day and hosts 9+ prep centers. And they make about $1 per package. So they're making $3,000 to $4,000 a day, which obviously is going to go and cover all of your warehousing costs, right? And I thought it was cool. I mean, you buy something from Nordstrom Rack, you want to resell it on Amazon, you're sending it to these prep centers, they're prepping it for you, and then they're sending it out to your final consumer. So you don't even actually have to touch the product. Lost you for a second. Well, I think you're freezing on me again. Oh, there we go. Sorry, say that again.
So it's interesting to see how people get innovative around, there's this massive business like an Amazon, but it's like, what else do they need, right? Like, even though it's like, oh, I'm sure they've come up with everything. It's like, well, maybe they haven't. What would be a pain point for Amazon? What would be that little accessorial business? And, when I think in a small town too, it's like, I'm sure a lot of, quite likely in Montana as it is in Canada, there's a lot of small towns who are accustomed to resource extraction. So if you were accustomed to a business where it was like you were a mining town or you were a paper mill town, and those businesses are sort of adjusting and fading out, well, what's next, right? And not everybody wants to move to the big city, and so what can we do in our community to be creative and kind of have an idea for a new business model. So
yeah, I just thought it was cool because obviously it's a new part of supply chain. It's not something that we talk a lot about. And so I wanted
anywhere.
I wanted to bring that up. Maybe there's somebody in Canada that's going to start a prep center in rural Canada somewhere.
In like Gimli, Winnipeg, they're gonna start it.
Is that actually a place?
Yeah.
Gimli?
Yeah, you haven't been to Gimli? Oh, you have to go to Gimli. Yeah, you got to get your Lake Winnipeg pickerel. You got to see the Viking statue. No, you got to go to Gimli.
Okay, maybe in the summer, but the winter, absolutely not.
definitely.
Because they get pretty, for anybody
In
who
the
doesn't
summer.
know Winnipeg, they get some pretty brutal winters. You do
Yeah.
not want to go there between
Yeah. And this is
October
north
and
of Winnipeg. So yeah. Summer.
anyways, that's it for us today on Thoughts and Coffee. Just want to wish everybody a really great week ahead. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to Audrey for joining us again. Next week, I don't know who I have on next week, so you're just gonna have to tune in and find out. But you know that we'll be talking about all of the hot supply chain topics. And yeah, thank you everybody. Really looking forward to seeing you next week, and enjoy your week ahead. Thanks, guys.